So what happens if the government doesn't shut down, but doesn't have a budget? Well, there's this thing called a continuing resolution, and that's normally what pulls the government out of a shutdown in lieu of a budget deal. That's likely to happen in this scenario that we have in front of us. A continuing resolution funds the government for a period of time, a short period of time, normally weeks or months, leading up to an expected budget resolution where the government actually has their full funding. So FY25, fiscal year 25, was the first time that I know of, and probably the first time ever, where the government was on a full year continuing resolution. That never is the case. And for a full year resolution, it really has some interesting handcuffs that get put on the federal workforce and the types of programs they can normally do. FY25 was a unique year. So under a full year continuing resolution, they passed a special rule that allowed for new starts, but under a traditional continuing resolution, no new starts are allowed. Really what it means is the government's on autopilot. So they'll take the funding levels that you had last year and they divide it out by the number of effectively days that you're on a continuing resolution, and they'll fund you that percentage of what was funded last year. And the only things that you can spend money on are the same things you spent money on last year. Now, there's lots of games we can play inside the machine to get things done. How we determine what a new start is, there's some flexibility there, definitely some gray area, but a continuing resolution is really not the best idea for anybody in government because it means we're just doing the same thing we did last year. And if our goal is to get even 1% better, doing the same thing you did before rarely yields that result. In our case, continuing resolution is definitely better than a full shutdown because that means the government can actually function and start to do some things. But it comes with delays, it comes with this uncertainty, and depending on the length of the continuing resolution, the government or the workers inside the government generally aren't willing to take decisive action on projects because they don't have the full funding to execute against. In many cases, they're now preparing for when the next shutdown could occur. So if the clock only goes for a few days or a week to keep the government open, again, the political theater that you've seen played out time and time again, the federal workforce is now consumed with, all right, well, do I show up to work when this is over or not? And they'll be watching the news, they'll be watching the headlines. In many cases, you'll see a deal get struck at the 11th hour or midnight, whatever, right before things are going to shut down. Or if it's going to happen on a weekend, you can bet they're going to allow the shutdown to occur over the weekend. They'll have a deal by Sunday night. So everyone still goes to work on Monday. So there's all sorts of games that get played, but a continuing resolution is the likely scenario in fiscal year 26 starts October 1st. So if we're in a continuing resolution, what does that mean for you? Well, if it's traditional, like we have had for many, many times prior to FY25, then that means no new starts. That means the government's going to be funded at the same level it was last year. So if you already have a program going with the government, you have a good chance of continuing that relationship, and that work will just continue on. You still have to deliver, you still have to do all the things you normally would have to do, but you are at far less risk. The government itself is at a much greater risk though, because it can't go and invest in the new. There's so much new technology in this day and age of AI and all the things that are happening. We need the ability to bring on the new tech. We need the ability to invest in where the technology is headed so that we can stay relevant as a military. So there's a huge risk systemically for us being in a CR environment, but we can't control it. So we have to surrender to the fact that likely we'll be under a CR for a period of time. There are things you can do if you want to be proactive to kind of fight back against the nonsense. You have the ability to go talk to your congressional members, your Senate representatives and your House representatives. These people will go and lobby on your behalf, not even lobby, though they are the decision makers. They will be your voice inside the machine. The more people they hear about how upset they are with the current situation, how upset they are with continuing resolutions, how upset they are if the government does indeed shut down for a period of time, they take all that, they extrapolate it out against their voter base, and they take action. And sometimes enough of those voices will cause them to compromise in an area to get a deal done. I can tell you, a government shutdown does not save the government any money at all. It costs way more money. And if I'm a government contractor, I'm submitting a request for equitable adjustment into the government if it causes me any real delays, and I'm actually charging the government more money because they have interrupted my performance in some capacity. In a CR, it doesn't save the government any money because the decision-making cycle, instead of like long-term decision-making, gets truncated into a much smaller, segment of thinking because you're only thinking till that CR runs out. So you really want to put yourself in a scenario where you're operating with a full budget and the team has the full amount of time, the government team has the full amount of time to obligate and expend its dollars. It's just not the case in the current political environment we have. So with a CR, that incremental funding drops will occur. Be flexible if you're a defense contractor and you're looking to keep your program running. The government may decide to fund bits and pieces of it along the way as their funding comes in. If you expect the full amount of funding to come because of how important your program is or something else, you might be very disappointed. So just be willing to be flexible with them, take whatever money they have and execute accordingly. Be willing to modify your contracts to be able to take less money, say there's an option to be exercised or something like that. Figure out a way to get the deal done because having the money, some money, is better than nothing, and eventually all the money comes. If there really is a delay that is caused by being on a CR or being under a government shutdown that dramatically impacts your contracted effort or your effort that you have on contract, don't be afraid to submit an REA. That's a request for equitable adjustment. Those requests at first just go into the contracting officer and they'll look at it and assess it and they'll make a reasonable determination. If you don't like what they have to say, you have the ability to appeal it. But in many cases, the contracting officer will be sympathetic to you. Make no mistake, people in the government that actually do the work, they don't think these shutdowns or CRs are good policy, are a good thing to do, or make things faster. I do think they enjoy the vacation sometimes. I know I did when I was inside the machine, but other than that, it was just a giant distraction to what we were trying to do. But that continuing resolution, it normally gets the ball rolling where you can kind of get back to business as usual, other than the fact of this no new starts. And what does that mean? Well, the financial manager is normally the one that determines if something's a new start or not. And if there's not an existing contract for it that an organization has done, they might call it a new start. If there's a SIBR that you're driving from, extending or completing to go do a phase 3, you have a fair argument to say, hey, this isn't a new start. But in many cases, it's that financial manager that's going to make the call and say, no, this is a new start. We're not allowed to do it under fiscal law while we're in a CR. Again, if you're working on cutting edge technology, you could very easily fall in this bucket, and that's not a good place to be. You want to be able to have the option to go do cool new stuff. So we don't want the government to be operating in a continuing resolution. Now, with FY25, Congress passed a very bizarre and weird continuing resolution where they allowed for new starts only if you were inside the congressional House marks or Senate marks. And those marks come out through the appropriations committee process, but they're definitely not law. And most people don't really have access to them. Sometimes they get published on the website. But it was a really weird way to say, yeah, we can do some new starts, but not all of them under a CR. And really the appropriations committee under FY25 gave up a ton of power because all the money came in as a top line appropriation. With that, the government finance guys could really do what they wanted to do with the money instead of what Congress's true intent might have been for that funding. I would be shocked to see another round of appropriation that happened like FY25 did because the appropriators gave up so much power. And that just doesn't fit with their common modus operandi. Like power seeks to preserve itself in almost every form. So I don't see them doing that again, but stranger things have happened. And if they do, that almost starts to shift the balance of power from the appropriator, who in my view of the world has the most power because they actually bring the money to the table and fund pieces of the government and fund programs, to the rulemakers, which are the people that help shape and craft the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. If government is going to be funded at a top line, like it was in FY25, and who knows what deal gets struck in FY26, but if it is funded at a top line, then how the money gets spent, the rules on how the government goes about spending the money become far more important than what was actually funded, because the whole thing is funded at the top line. So that means if you have a government liaison or some type of ledge affairs team, you should be focused on shaping the language on how the government's going to spend the money once the top line gets appropriated. Most companies were not prepared to do that. Their ledge affairs teams were not doing that for them when FY25 happened because it's just so unprecedented. But coming out of FY25, going into FY26, where we see the prospect of a multi-day shutdown, multi-week shutdown maybe, and we have the prospect of a continuing resolution already on the table, who knows? Maybe they will go back and do another full-year CR. And maybe when they do that, they appropriate at the top line and don't release the tables where they intend the money to go. Unprecedented stuff, truly. And if you are leaning in and looking forward about how to play the game, you will have an outsized advantage over any other defense contractor that's in the same space, because most people just cannot react to change as fast as it's happening at the federal government. So if I were you, I would write to Congress, let them know what your feelings are, tell them explicitly how disappointed you are that we don't have a budget. Tell them explicitly that you think CRs are a waste of time because they don't allow us to invest in the new stuff the way we should be to keep a cutting edge military. Tell them that government shutdowns are just a giant waste of money and time, and the political theater isn't buying them any goodwill with you or points with anybody. If you do those things, you're being a proactive citizen and you're doing your best to help countries stay on track for having a cutting edge military. You're helping your company stay on track for being able to deliver cutting edge new capabilities into the Department of War, by the way. New name, so that's kind of exciting. But regardless, write Congress, let them know what you feel, let them know what you think about it. Once you've done that, take your continuing resolution thoughts, all the stuff that you've heard, all the myths, all the rumors, all the stuff, bottle it up, put it on the shelf. It doesn't matter. We are living in unprecedented times, and if what happened in FY25 happens in FY26, we got to change the game, and we got to think differently about how we're going to work with the appropriators, or work with the rules makers, the NDA guys, instead of the appropriators. But who knows? We'll see how it plays out. More to come. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe, and there'll be a lot more content here to help you. Have a great day. Bye.